The Boy from Yesterday, Chapter 5, A Stitch in Time. Tom was breathless. He had been back to Dr. Hurd's office again, and his spinster sister, Cynthia, had answered the door, but Dr. Hurd had gone out to visit a couple of patients and see to some business, but didn't know when he would be back. Tom thought that was kind of pathetic, that someone as supposedly smart as Dr. Hurd would be so dumb as to not leave word of where he was in an emergency. But he was the only doctor in town, and the next closest one was in the next town, Brattleton, some miles away. Tom, in general, didn't think much of medicine, because it hadn't done much for his parents as they died from yellow fever, as so many had. There were countless stories of others around town, men, women, especially children, who had died with the doctor standing right there or nearby. Tom didn't see doctors as much more good use than a good plow horse, and he was likely to bet on the plow horse. Still, he would do anything to help Sam, and somehow he knew the salve from the second shelf of the general store wasn't going to be nearly enough. Tom searched the back streets of Chesterfield, just keeping an eye out for Dr. Hurd, scanning the streets among the inhabitants, which he noticed were becoming more and more numerous just this year alone. Tom could go into town and spend so much extra time walking around doing this errand or that, usually for something for Uncle Nate, and double the time it took because of stopping to greet everyone he knew every few feet. These days, so many strangers were coming to town off the train and apparently staying there. Boarding houses that used to have vacancies had none, or at least fewer. Strapping men, even those he didn't recognize, were building a new building or extending the street blocks longer and farther from Main Street than ever before. More horses seemed to ride the streets and mess it up, too, Tom noted, in the scent in the air. More people meant more of everything, including new sales at the store. Tom and Uncle Nate weren't poor, as Tom's parents had been, and Uncle Nate, as simple as he was doing better and better because more people coming to Chesterfield meant more sales of just about everything at the store, and more demand for new products that were becoming available all the time. More people meant more entertainment that came through Chesterfield, too. There had been orchestras, lectures, plays, circuses, chautauquas, and Tom could afford to see them, at least for a balcony seat, but he always thought animals being made to do tricks was silly. Just riding Chestnut was trick enough for an animal, or to pull a plow, or to play with some stray dog or cat in the street. But the circuses and various newfangled shows and entertainment that came off that train to Chesterfield seemed to take the town in a way that was a little overwhelming. Passing Concord Street, he saw a flyer pasted to a telegraph pole that was advertising a new show coming to the Chesterfield Theater next month. One Zellar the Great, a magician, who was coming home to Chesterfield after a long world tour. Tom had seen various showmen, fakers, and magicians in the past, and he liked them all right. He sat on the edge of his seat in the balcony of the Chesterfield Theater while a magician seemed to saw a beautiful lady inside a box right in half. Tom thought at the time, if I had a beautiful lady right there with me, I wouldn't be sawing her in half. I'd be looking for ways to treat her well. Zellar was considered a very mysterious man in town, respected at the theater, but seldom spotted outside of it. Tom had never seen him at the general store. Uncle Nate had said that he sold some unusual items like saltpeter, probably used for pyrotechnic effects, that he thought an assistant was buying on Zellar's behalf, but suspected that Zellar sent assistants to buy supplies so the secrets of his tricks wouldn't be discernible from the items he bought at the store. There were also packages for him that arrived frequently in the post, some of them large, but assistants always seemed to pick them up at the post office inside the general store without much comment, except a polite, "Good day, sir." The poster on the pole was just one more distraction in his scanning the various heights of heads and hats, but none were Dr. Hurd. He came to the end of Concord Street and turned the corner, and a lady with a parasol almost bumped into him, but he said, "Excuse me, ma'am," nevertheless, and tipped his cap as he passed her. And as he turned around, he bumped into a tall man in a black coat who was in a dead stop on the sidewalk. Tom turned and looked up. It was Dr. Hurd. "Thomas, what's the matter?" "I just heard from Mrs. Butts that you visited Cynthia looking for me. Who's ill?" said Dr. Hurd, somewhat impatiently, as if Tom didn't have the right to seek out the town doctor when someone was ill. Sam, sir. Sam Beckons. He was thrown from Blitzen, his horse, and his leg got gashed up awfully badly, I'm afraid. He's been in bed ever since with some kind of fever, something awful. He cut it on a rock as he landed in the dirt. Blitzen got spooked by a snake or something reared up, see, and Sam landed on it. The rock, sir, not the snake, on the leg. You need to come quick, just as quick as you can, sir, Tom blurted, as if he had been rehearsing the speech and taking off his cap. Dr. Hurd patted his shoulder, half reassuringly and half condescendingly. There now, Tom. I'm sure it's just a light wound of the flesh, but I'll be around shortly. Mrs. Appleton is delivering her twins any moment, and I'm due there. I'll need to help the midwife in a case like this. Mrs. Appleton's had some trouble before. I'll call on Sarah and Sam immediately after. You have my word. With that, he rushed off around the corner where Tom had just been, black medical bag in hand, and held his hat down on his head as the winds were picking up, and the clouds that had been over the hills when Tom had left the Beckons home were now hovering directly over town, threatening rain. Tom felt just a couple of drops from the sky and looked up to see a dark cloud overtaking the afternoon sun overhead. He decided to go back to Sarah's and lend some moral support, even if he couldn't do much more than that, and help her bide time until Dr. Hurd could arrive later. At least he could let her know of his encounter with Dr. Hurd and let her know that help was on the way. The people in the streets bustled faster with the clouds overhead, eager to avoid the rain and the inevitable mud that would come with it in the streets. The streets seemed more clogged, and people walked every which way, which was hard to cut through. Tom knew a few shortcuts, but took the street that led near the train station. He made his way through the crowds with bags, hats, canes, packages, trunks, and all kinds of things they traveled with. He tipped his cap to Mrs. Edgington and Mr. Freeman, and little Michael Pullman, who shouted, "Candy boy! Candy boy!" which was Tom's nickname because Mr. Pullman had always taken Michael into the general store on occasion to get him some candy. More people here near the train station seemed to know Tom, which was reassuring, but no one was in the mood to chat, given the imposing weather and the seemingly inevitable storm. Nearer the train station, Tom walked down the platform, now empty of trains, while both familiar and unfamiliar people stood poised and ready for the next train, due any moment now, checking their pocket watches and fetching their tickets from their breast pockets. The wind picked up as the sound of the next train whistled from down the tracks, slowing down, but still seemingly speeding up as it got closer and closer to Chesterfield Station. As Tom walked the length of the long platform, he headed toward the far end of the station where he could shortcut to the streets that would lead back to Sam's. He spotted a tall, elegant silhouette of a man a ways ahead of him. It was a statuesque man, imposing, exquisitely dressed in a long black overcoat of a high fashion, and a tall, shiny, black silk top hat. He was carrying a dark ebony cane with a silver handle and a silver decoration that wrapped down the length of the cane. He carried a large black case in his left hand that seemed heavy because it didn't swing very much when the man walked. Tom had never seen this man before, and indeed he stood out because, despite Chesterfield being an all-right town, very few of the gentlemen could afford to dress like this. Tom looked at the hat, which was more impressive than any he had ever seen Uncle Nate sell at the store, even to the professors from the Teachers' College, or to the men who owned mills in the neighboring towns. As Tom gazed at the hat, wondering what it would be like to own such a magnificent thing instead of the modest wool cap that Tom wore, a large gust of wind blew through the station across the platform, catching the brim of the man's hat and lifting it powerfully off his head, exposing some gray hair below the balding crown of his head. The hat seemed to float on the air, straight toward Tom, as if it were a playful stray dog that was going to run up as a stranger and demand to be petted. It tumbled, head over brim, several times, as the sound of the engine of the next train came closer and closer behind Tom on the platform. The man turned and squinted his eyes in a concerned look at the airborne hat, and had started taking great big steps toward it in Tom's direction. Heavy case be damned. The cane was apparently more for show. The man had no trouble striding fast. As it flew right toward And then a little past Tom's nose, Tom reached out and grabbed the hat with his left arm outstretched at the very edge of the platform and pulled it out of the way of the oncoming train's cowcatcher just as it was pulling into the depot. Tom jumped back himself from the edge of the platform to be clear of the engine's edges, right into the path of a woman walking with her two identically dressed teenage daughters beside her. "Heavens, sir," said the woman, as she gave a little sneer at Tom and pulled her daughters away quickly toward the first-class cars of the train. Her daughters looked back at Tom coquettishly with a subtle smile, and then giggled and whispered in each other's ears. Tom looked down and searched the wonderful top hat that he had caught in his hand. It was soft, yet sturdily constructed. It was fascinating to hold, as it had been to see on the tall man's head. Tom was lost, looking in the hat, when he heard a deep voice behind him. "Indeed, madam, heavens had nothing to do with it, I assure you," the voice said. Tom turned to see where it was coming from, and the tall man had caught up with him, the big black case set on the ground on the platform next to him. He stood even taller close up than he had seemed from a distance. His eyes were deep and dark, and the front of his outfit was more impressive than the hat. He stood tall and proud, with white-gloved hands, his right hand still holding the cane. Tom could see the detail on the top of the cane now, which was a silver wolf's head, with its silver tail wrapping around in a spiral down the length of the cane. The tall man's black overcoat covered a gray vest with black stripes, and his dark gray pants matched, even over black shoes with white spats. Deep red studs fastened the top of his shirt and sparkled a bit, even with the dark skies overhead. Tom bet in his head that they were rubies, but he wasn't ever really sure that he'd seen a ruby before. A fresh white carnation was tucked into the man's lapel. An elaborate gold chain led from a button on his vest to his watch pocket, and Tom could only imagine the watch that must have been inside. He had a small black string tied around his neck that buttoned with a dark onyx cameo pin, another thing that Tom had never seen before. His deep eyes stared down at Tom as he held his left hand out, palm up, frozen, as if expecting to be given back the hat. "I beg your pardon, sir," Tom said. "A fine hat, sir." He handed it to the man, almost reluctant to see its smooth softness leave his hands, not ready for his brief custodial possession of it to be over so soon. "You obviously have good reflexes. Your own sleight of hand, I should say. In just the nick of time," said the man, who took the hat in his hand but stood still frozen. Eyes intently gazed on Tom. "Thank you, sir," Tom said, not sure what to say next, intimidated by the man's grandeur. "I should be thanking you, sir," said the tall man, who broke his frozen pose to tuck his cane under his left elbow and reached into his inside breast pocket and pulled out a bright, sturdy white card. "And rewarded, at that." He paused, studying Tom as if the man had never seen someone like Tom before. He paused again. "Yes, indeed I shall, young man," he said, oddly emphasizes the young, as he presented the calling card to Tom in a grand gesture, pausing to let Tom take the card and read what it said. "William Irving Zellar, Angels Reconciled to Demons, Conjuring and the Sleight of Hand, 666.5 Casa Grande Street," and then below it, in rather small print, "Booked by engagement to the finest theaters only." It dawned on Tom who this was. The magician he had seen years ago at the theater, whom he had just seen depicted in the poster on the telegraph pole. "You're Mr. Zellar, the magician coming home to the Chesterfield Theater next month," Tom said, reciting the flyer, not able to contain his excitement at meeting what was, to him, the first celebrity he would know. "Simply Zellar, if you please," the man responded. "You may call me Zellar." He picked up the heavy black case beside him with ease and affixed his top hat, as the wind had died down and even the sun was starting to come out again as the platform emptied and the train began to pull off the station. Zellar started to turn away, then turned back to Tom. "Young man," he said, returning the favor of manners that Tom had given him, "and what shall I call you?" Tom took off his cap and gave a brief bow of respect, blushing a little and smiling as he said, "I'm Tom, sir, Tom Flannery. Of the Chesterfield General Store. My uncle, Nate Flannery, owns that, see, and we've run it for a while now together. And I'm just sorry I was in such a hurry there, sir, but my friend Sam, see, got thrown from blitzing his horse, see, and he's something exceeding sick. See, in his leg, it's his leg all swollen up and red, and I'm trying to find Dr. Hurd, and this here shortcut is the way back to Miss Beckon's place. And Tom, Zellar said firmly, stopping Tom's litany and extending his now ungloved right hand, it is my distinct pleasure to make your acquaintance. You have saved my hat, which is very dear to me. It was a gift. Therefore, I'd like to make a gift to you. He paused a moment with an intense gaze of his dark eyes on Tom. Perhaps it might help your friend, he said as he smiled. Tom stared at the man, confused at what he was saying, but polite enough to hear him out. Why don't you call on me at my home tomorrow, an hour before noon? No later, he said firmly. Then softer, I have some things from my collection which may interest you. Magic interests you, I assume, Mr. Tom Flannery? Yes, sir, very much so, Tom said, humbled and honored that this man was inviting the local shopkeeper's nephew to his home. And I'm sure you will interest it, he added, raising his eyebrow, looking down his nose, and smiling a reserved smile. Yes, sir, Tom said, having no idea what the man meant, but impressed enough to want to continue conversing with the great Zellar. A little before noon, you said, sir, Tom said, as Tom put down on his own cap. An hour before, if you please, 11 a.m. Promptly, if you please. Good luck with your friend, Tom, and a good evening. I shall look forward to your visit tomorrow. With that, Zellar turned gracefully on his heel and seemed to glide down the platform, lightly tapping his cane to the ground with each step and disappearing from view, blocked by crowds of people. Tom carefully reread the calling card and put it in his pocket and headed back down the platform, deciding to stop at home to make something to eat for himself and Uncle Nate, who would be home soon, too. Tom decided he would let Sam rest for now and head back in the morning, after Dr. Hurd had had a chance to visit. Tom walked home, readjusting to the sights of life on the streets of Chesterfield, its bustling pedestrians, the smell of horse manure in the air, the dusty streets, the cool breeze after the passing threat of storm, and the chatter of people passing by. Reality dawned back on him after such an exciting but odd counter with the mysterious Zellar the Great.